Hi friends, so glad you're here to join me for our See the Light, Yes You Can Draw special art class. Today we're going to be working on one of our very special stories, and this is about Jonah and the fish, and it's called Released. And I'm so glad you're here to be a part of it, but let me tell you what you're going to need for today's class. You'll need a piece of medium toned colored paper. I would say 9 by 12, but no larger than 11 by 14. Now I'm going to be working on a larger piece of paper so that you can see it on camera. You'll need a standard pencil, a really great eraser. I prefer the kneaded eraser. A set of pastels, at least 12, but I'm using a set of 24. You'll need a set of fluorescent pastels, and these are available on the See the Light website. You're also going to need a small black light. That's available on the See the Light website as well. Now, whenever we work with pastels, we need to have some of our materials around to help us stay clean, like some tissues and some baby wipes. Now, if you're having trouble getting a hold of a black light, talk to Mom and Dad and see if you can get a small black light that's available on the See the Light website, seethelightshine.com. But if you don't have a black light, that's okay, because this drawing will still be wonderful and will be a great addition to your portfolio. Okay, so our story today is Jonah and the fish. And you might know that story because you've heard it at your church, or Mom and Dad have read it to you, or you've read it in the Bible in the book of Jonah. But I want to make sure we really focus on some key elements of this story. Everyone thinks it's a fun story about a guy who ran away and got swallowed by a fish. But there's so much more. So let's dive in. Put your paper up lengthwise, okay, so across this way. And we're going to start off with our pencil. Now, normally when you're working with pastels, it's kind of like painting. You would just go right in with pastels. But for new artists, I want you to start off with a fine pencil to get some basic areas outlined first. So that's what we're going to do. So on your paper, we're going to delineate 4 components that are the keys to this drawing. And the 4 components are the sandy beach, the water in the ocean, the big fish, and Jonah. And the rest is just extra. So let's work on our 4 components. We're going to start with making a jagged diagonal line coming from the upper left to the lower right. But it's not from corner to corner. We're going to go in about 2 to 3 inches on either side. Now I'm going to draw a little darker because I want you to see it. But you're going to draw lightly. So kind of just go a jagged line from one corner to the other, like that. This is actually our coastline where the water comes into the beach. Now our second component is going to be the big fish. Now he's going to be in the lower left. Jonah is going to be about center right. Now before I can draw the big fish, I've got to get Jonah. Why do I have to do Jonah first? Because the fish has to be larger than Jonah. And so I need to get the right size. I don't want Jonah to be too small. He's our key figure. So whenever we do figures, we always start with the key skeletal structure. So we're going to make a stick figure and then we'll flush it out. So very lightly, you're going to draw the line that would be the back or the spine, a horizontal line for the shoulder, and a horizontal line for the hip. Now why am I doing it so low? Well, we're going to have Jonah kneeling on the beach. He has just been spit up by the fish, and so he's exhausted, and so he is going to be kneeling on the beach. So his upper legs will be bent at an angle. His lower legs are resting on the beach. His arms are going to be up, thanking God for rescuing him. And then we have our oval for our head. So there is our basic structure. Now we're going to flush Jonah out. Okay, so we're going to actually add in his figure. So to start, we only see the back of Jonah's head, by the way. You're going to start at the shoulder line, and you're going to go on either side of your stick figure. Now, if it was just an arm, it would be like this. But I'm going to imagine that Jonah actually has on some ragged clothes. He's been through quite a lot. So we're going to make some ragged clothes on Jonah, torn and ragged. and his shirt would be torn and ragged like this. Now, we don't worry about too much detail with the hands. Other arm is out. Awesome. Now for his lower body, again, he probably has on some pants that are ragged and jagged and torn from what he's been through. Remember, he was tossed off of a ship and then swallowed by a fish, and we are not really sure how long he was there, but boy, he was praying a lot for God to rescue him while he was there. So then we're putting his lower legs again on either side of our structural lines. And of course he'd be barefoot by this time. And so a heel, and we're going to have his foot kind of under like he is ready to stand on the sand. So now we're doing this leg, his heel. Now that we have his body, we can work on his head. We're really only going to see mostly the back of Jonah, but we're going to see just a little bit of his face as he's looking out. So we're going to draw a profile. Remember, we learned about profile where you only see the side of a nose and you see a little bit of an eye. But Jonah probably had some pretty scraggly hair, and I'm sure he had a beard. You probably would get some facial hair living in a fish for a while. And so there's our Jonah. So now, friends, now that you have the core body of Jonah on, you can get rid of this stick figure that was underneath. And you know what's fun? We're going to add seaweed to Jonah when we get to the pastel part. I bet you he was a mess. So now we have Jonah, we see his size. So now we know if we're going to make our fish, it's going to have to be a really big fish, big enough for that body of Jonah to slide in there. So in this lower left, you're only going to see the head of the fish. The rest of him will be submerged in the water. So you're going to kind of make a rounded triangle shape and a large mouth or some big lips. Yes, fish have lips. And we'll see an eye. So you can see this was a pretty big fish. You know, a lot of people think Jonah was swallowed by a whale, but Scripture tells us it was simply a big fish. So we don't really know what kind of fish. It just says a fish. And you can read the entire book of Jonah and get the whole story. So here's our big fish. So he's big, right? Jonah would fit in there. And the other element we want to have in here, so we have our water and we have our beach, is a sign. So in the upper right, so you kind of see we're creating some action with creating a diagonal line leading whoever is looking at your drawing to the sign. So we have the fish here, and we have Jonah here, and when you see his arms outstretched, and kind of make a jagged rectangle, almost like an old sign made of wood, right? A jagged rectangle in this upper right. And then it's on a post. Like this. And here's the key, friends. Very lightly, I want you to draw on the sign, I want you to write, to Nineveh. Now, Nineveh was the capital of Assyria at that time. Very important city. And that's where God wanted Jonah to go. Even though the people of Nineveh were kind of not really great people, God still loved them. God still wanted them to turn to Him. And that's where He wanted Jonah to go. But Jonah didn't want any parts of it. He didn't want to go to Nineveh. That city, they were like the enemy. But Nineveh is important in our story. And I want you to write to Nineveh and a nice arrow, nice big arrow on the sign, pointing that way. So there we have our key structure. Now yours should be lighter than mine. Again, mine's darker because I'm doing it so you can see it on the camera. If your lines are too dark, take your eraser and lighten them up. You can just run your kneaded eraser over your lines because we're going to use pastel now, friends. Okay, so we're just going to lighten our lines. All right, so now we're getting ready to work with our pastels. Now you might recall when we worked with pastels before, there's some basics for working with pastels, and the first is you want to make sure you keep yourself and your artwork clean. So make sure you roll up your sleeves or wear a shirt over what you're doing. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to put on my work shirt. So if I get pastel on me, I'm still keeping my clothes protected. Now when you work with pastel, normally you work from top to bottom and from dark to light. But most of the action in this picture is happening in our foreground, in the bottom. So this is one exception where I'm actually not going to work from the top to the bottom. I'm actually going to work on the areas that are most important because this drawing is going to do a fade away. The back or the background is actually going to just fade away rather than focusing a lot of attention on that. So the first thing I want to do is work on the beach. And we're simply going to lay a base color. So find something in your pastel set that's, if you don't have like a beige or sandy color, you can use a light tan, you can even use orange, that's fine. And we're simply going to lay a really light layer of color in this sandy area. And I'm just going to kind of have it fade. And I'm going to go around Jonah like this. And I want to kind of get around his body. So now I'm going to take a tissue and I'm going to very gently, not too much now, remember if you rub too much you take the color right off the paper. And it's okay if you go into where Jonah is because we're going to be doing him later. Now this is just my base color. This is not the full sand. Sand is actually pretty tricky to do. In fact, artists struggled with sand because it's usually so flat, but you know that it's sand. You don't want it to look like another kind of surface. So there's an artist who did a lot of work with sand. Actually, he did a lot of work with a lot of things, and it's Claude Monet. He was a very prolific painter. That meant he painted a lot of paintings of a lot of subject matter. So take a look at this painting by Claude Monet called The Beach at Sainte-Adresse. You'll notice there's several colors in the sand, lots of small marks. In fact, even the same thing with the water. It's not just one color, but lots of small marks with a lot of different colors of the water. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be laying a color as our foundation or our base, and then we'll go back in and add in some more color, small marks. So now I have my base for our sand. Now I want to do the base for our water. So for this I want to take a medium blue and I'm going to take a light blue. Now the reason why I have two blues, friends, is because water, when it gets closer to the shoreline or the beach, doesn't have saturated color. It's much lighter. Okay. So I'm going to get the light blue and go up against my shoreline. And I have all these little indentations I made. I'm going to go around my fish. Now he's in the water. We want to make sure it looks like he's in the water, not floating above it. There we go. So that should happen really quick. And this I'm actually going to just use my hands really quick because I am going to go back and blend in some darker color. Take my darker blue and the blue that's back here, see, this is further away from Jonah. Make that a little darker. Now whenever you're doing pastels where you have large areas, you're going to create a lot of dust because you're going over really quickly with your pastel. I have mine on an easel, so the dust just kind of falls to the bottom. But if you're working on a flat surface like a desk or a table, every once in a while you're going to have to pick up your paper and simply tap it on the table. Don't brush with your hand, you're going to make a mess. And don't blow either, you're going to blow the dust into a color you don't want. So pick up your paper and simply tap it on the table. Now I'm going to go back in and make layers. So I'm probably going to go over where I had dark and add in some more light. That's why I keep the two pastels in my hand at the same time. And blend. And I am going to go back in now with the corner of my pastel and make marks, horizontal type marks that are going towards the shore. Now I will probably have to go back in once I do my fish and put in some shadows, because even though he's in the water, his body will cast a shadow in there as he pops his head out. Now as I'm close to the shore, I'm going to take back my main sand color and actually drag some of that out, because the water going over the sand, that sand will show through. So you see I'm just very lightly going over, just right at the shoreline. Now if you've been to the beach, you've seen when the water comes in, right at that edge there's a little foam. So we're going to take a white pastel, and right at the edge you're going to do just some small little marks of where that foamy stuff, it doesn't have to be everywhere on that jagged line you drew, but every here and there, because that's what water does. It kind of foams up when it hits that sand. My hands are dirty, and before I go any further, I'm going to need to do some cleanup. Make sure while you're doing your pastels that you're always checking to make sure that your hands are clean. So now that I have my base of my sand and most of my ocean, probably not all of it yet, we always can keep adding details, I want to work on Jonah. Now for Jonah, we're simply going to put in patches of color. We're not going to worry about getting too detailed. But I'm going to start with a somewhat tannish color for his skin. And again, I'm just going very quickly. I'm not worried too much about detail. What we're trying to do is keep the focus on the sign. So here's his foot. Boy, I bet you he was battered and bruised, don't you think? You can smooth it out very lightly with a fingertip. What would you do if you were swallowed by a fish? Goodness gracious. For his pants, I'm going to choose just a dull dark gray. And again, I'm making jagged lines because I think probably they were torn. Now, if the area is too small to use a tissue, you can always use an ear swab. And very lightly go back in. Helps you kind of see where you're working too. And blend the pastel with the ear swab. I think I'm going to make Jonah's tunic shirt like a reddish color, because I have a lot of blue going on here. Jagged bottom, right, kind of raggy. There we go. So I can get in a big block of color, and I will use the other end of my ear swab that's clean to do some blending. Now I have this red on my ear swab. I'm actually going to go back and do some. I think his feet would be cut up and he'd be kind of a mess, right? He'd probably have some cuts and scrapes. So that's what I'm going to do there. Now you can make Jonah's hair any color you want, black, brown, blonde, red, whatever you like, whatever you think. I'm just going to use a dark brown. And the back of the head is mostly going to be covered in hair because we're seeing him at an extreme view where we only see a very tiny bit of his profile and his beard. And get a new swab and blend it in. So you see, we're not putting a lot of detail into Jonah. But a fun little detail you can put into Jonah is to grab a green pastel and let's put some seaweed on him. So it's kind of long and stringy, kind of hanging off of him. My guess is there was all kinds of stuff in that fish's belly that kind of came out with him. So we're just going to put some seaweed, long strippy things hanging off of Jonah. Okay, so now I want to work on our friend the fish. Now this is a really fun part for you as an artist. No one has any idea what that fish looked like. So you can make that fish any color you want, something you like in your pastel box. So I'm going to make him, kind of certain shades of green. I'm a green kind of person, so I think I'm going to make this a green fish. So because it's a large area, actually I'm going to break my pastel, and it's fine to break pastels, they actually work better that way. I'm actually going to put in the large area for the fish on the side of my pastel. There we go. Use my finger to blend. But I want to make sure the fish has a dimension, which means so it looks like it's 3D. So the edges of the fish will actually be a darker shade. Let's see, I'm going to find... And if you don't have multiple shades of a particular color that you want to use in your set, you can always add a little bit of gray or brown. But see, this way it looks like he's not just a flat cut-out fish. Let's see. What kind of lips? I think I want to give him maybe this color. So whatever you decide to do for the fish's lips, maybe make that the dorsal fin. A dorsal fin just means it's a fin that's on his back. And since he's going off the page, the fin will go off the page as well. Clean finger. Perfect. So did you pick out some fun colors for your fish? Pink maybe? Maybe orange? That's the cool thing. You can do whatever you want. I think I'm going to actually give him a teal eye as well. And then we'll put some reflection in it. Little round eye for the fish. Then you can add in some fun details. You can put a little reflection in the fish's eye. Some highlights on the lips. I don't know what I would do if I saw a fish quite like that. Now, because he's in the water and most of his body is down in the water, we know that there's going to be some shadow created in the water down here where he is. You can draw a little bit of water going over the fish, and then you're going to have to make this area darker. The fish's body is down in there, and they would cast a shadow on the water, so that would be a darker area. Now, our sign. Our sign is a really important part of the story, and I really want it to show. So I'm going to use one of our fluorescent pastels for this part of the story. So I think I'm going to use the fluorescent pink. You can use anything from your fluorescent set. So I'm going to very carefully outline my sign. I'm not filling it in, I'm simply outlining it in my chosen fluorescent color. Like so. And very carefully, friends, using the corner of your pastel, you're going to go over your lettering that says to Nineveh. So as you're doing your lettering, you can pause your DVD and finish the sign in your fluorescent color. Fill in the arrow and do your lettering. All right, so you should have filled in the word and the arrow with your fluorescent color. But now we're going to go back to our regular pastels. I'm just going to take a brown for the signpost. And whenever you're doing something that you think is made of wood, it has a texture, which means you can make some jagged lines. Maybe even add in some other brown so it looks like wood. Now, Our sand is still too flat. We want to add in some extra color. Remember what Claude Monet did? Small marks of color to create texture and dimension. So we want to put in with some other pastels that are similar in range of color. So maybe some oranges, some tans, some browns, some small marks. And you're mostly going to see them where it's closer to you. You always see detail when it's closer. You don't as it gets further away. So we're just going to add in some small marks of tan, some brown. And back where the signpost is, we're actually going to put in some brown over our sandy color, like so. And you're actually going to make what looks like a road beyond that. So it's a line that you're drawing, and then you're shading underneath the line, so it's kind of the edge of your pastel. Go back to your sand color. That's the great thing about pastels, that you can layer over and over. If it's too dark, you can add something light. We're going to let this fade. Add in some more marks. Now where Jonah is, he would cast a little bit of a shadow on the sand, so take your brown and right by his leg on the sand to the right, make some small marks and blend that in. Kind of shows where Jonah is there. Time to clean up. Always check, make sure your hands are clean. And step back. This is a great opportunity while you're cleaning your hands to step back, take a look, see what you want to add. Not enough going on up here, my friends, and I know we're trying to keep our action to the sign, but this is when you can go back in and add those fun details that kind of tell something to your viewer. I want to let everyone know how big that beach is where Jonah landed, so I'm going to put in some other elements that help show scale. So I'm just going to grab my brown pastel, and I'm just going to throw in a couple palm trees. So you can make some marks, and by their size, way back there, I kind of show how far away they are and how, what the size of Jonah. And then I'm going to just make some palm fronds at the top here. Now, I don't know if there were palm trees on the beach where Jonah landed, but since the fish just came out of the water, we want to kind of show that this is on a beach. Maybe on a hill here, on the sand. Maybe there's another smaller one back there. Very faded, very light. Remember, details recede in the distance, so we don't see as much detail. So I'm just going to be very light. They're further away. So it creates a visual element here and helps show some scale. Our fish is very large when you see it compared to Jonah, so that helps, and the trees are in the distance, so they're smaller. So I can add in some more details, and you can do that too. You can add in some marks for your water. And make the ocean as dark as it goes away as possible, or the sand. You can add in some pebbles. I know what I'm going to add right here, right in the front here with my white pastel. I'm going to make a little skeleton of a fish. How's that? Head, tail, and the ribs. That came out of the fish too, the big fish. So it's all those fun little details like the seaweed and the fish that add to the story. But the best part of the story is coming up, my friends. So as I clean up, let me finish the story of Jonah. Jonah was just spat up onto the beach by the fish. And he was so excited that he was free. And even as he was kneeling there, praising God for releasing him from the fish, I'm sure he was thinking, what do I do next? And that's the cool part. God sent him a sign to tell him exactly what to do next. In fact, it's in the Bible. Let's read it together. in the book of Jonah, Jonah 3, verse 1 through 3. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now here's the thing. It didn't say that Jonah saw God in person. It didn't say that Jonah heard an audible voice. It says, then the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Friends, we have the word of the Lord available to us all the time. The Bible, that's the word of the Lord. And there's so many great things in there about how to live life right. And so the key is, are we going to obey? And that's the story of Jonah, obedience. So now we're going to see exactly the sign that God gave to Jonah. So put on your black light. Sometimes God gives us clear signs about what to do, just like He did here. But sometimes we have to ask the Holy Spirit for guidance, that we will see and hear what God wants us to do. Jonah knew what God wanted him to do. And there's a great verse in the book of John, John 14:23. Jesus replied, if anyone loves me, he will obey my teaching. My Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. That's what we want to do, friends, obey. We love Jesus so much that we want to obey. I hope you enjoyed our time together with our special story of Jonah and obedience. See you next time for a special art class.